Good evening, friends. Welcome to St. Andrew by the Sea United Methodist Church. It's so great to have all of you joining with us tonight in the second Poverty in the Lowcountry series here on our beautiful island. My name is Jonathan Tompkins. I am one of the pastors here, and we're so grateful that you have joined us here tonight to learn more about Volunteers in Mission, one of our wonderful services that we offer here on Hilton Head. I want to begin us with a prayer, and the first 6 lines of this prayer come to us from Ambrose of Milan from the 4th century A.D. And then the rest of the prayer comes to us courtesy of the Book of Common Worship from the Presbyterian Church USA. I figured we would be ecumenical tonight, and so I invite us now to go to God in prayer. Gracious God, you are medicine for me when I am sick. You are my strength when I need help. You are life itself when I fear death. You are the way when I long for heaven. You are light when all is dark. You are my food when I need nourishment. Mighty and merciful God, you sent Jesus Christ to heal broken lives. We praise you that today you send healing in doctors and nurses and bless us with technology and medicine. We claim your promises of wholeness as we pray for those who are ill in body or mind, who long for your healing touch. Make the weak strong, the sick healthy, the broken whole, and confirm those who serve them as agents of your love. Then all shall be renewed in vigor to point to the risen Christ, who conquered death that we might live eternally. Amen. Pastor Elizabeth Johnson will introduce our speaker tonight.
Grace and peace to you. I am Elizabeth Johnson. I am one of the pastors at First Presbyterian Church, and we are thrilled that you are here for this second class in this series. Tonight we have another rock star that will present to us, Dr. John Neiman. He attended medical school from a military medical school in Bethesda, and he is a general surgeon by trade. He told me it took him about 35 years to figure out what God's call was for his life. And 4 years ago, he joined Volunteers in Medicine. He came here from Northeast Wisconsin and has 4 children. For fun, he loves to fly planes. And he told me, and I also know that he does have a passion for gardening, and I am, I shouldn't say I'm jealous, but I kind of am, of the gardening that he has going over at Vim. It's unbelievable. I'd like to sneak in there at night with a shovel. He goes to church at St. Francis by the Sea, and tonight he is going to talk to us about health and poverty. So will you join me in welcoming Dr. John Neiman?
Well, Brian, does this work? Well, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for the invite. I want to talk about one of my favorite topics, volunteers in medicine, and maybe one of my not-so-favorite topics, poverty and healthcare. And the talk tonight on poverty is going to really be about our local poverty. This is what we're seeing here every day. With, I would say, keep in the back of your mind, though, this concept of global poverty, that is 25% of the globe doesn't have power tonight when they go home. 30% of the globe is going to cook or burn wood to stay warm tonight. So we're going to keep it very focused on what's going on here in the United States and what's going on here in Hilton Head. But as we look around the globe, one, just thank the Lord just how fortunate we are to be where we're at. But also, I suspect, you guys may have had the same sermon I did last Sunday about it is easier for a wealthy man to crawl through the eye of a needle, or it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for wealthy men to enter the goodness of heaven. And that gets me every time. I'm glad they clarified that the eye of the needle happens to be a door separate from the main door, because I'm like, I'm doomed with and they told me, don't stand close to the podium, John. You belong over here by the lectern. So I think that's a safe thing. So Brian, you could advance the next slide. And I'm going to talk tonight about poverty and healthcare. We can go to the next one, because this is what we all know. And this is Hilton Head, right? This is beautiful. This is why we're all here. This is, 25 years ago when we started vacationing, this is what just enamored us with the beauty of the island, the wonderfulness of these people. But then when you go to the next slide, Brian, what you'll see here is that this is only a mile away. And the irony of this photo being taken through the window of a brand new Lexus convertible is not lost on me. As we look out and say, this is also the folks that live on this island. Next slide, Brian. So when we talk about, health care and poverty, I don't want to just focus about volunteers in medicine just yet, because volunteers in medicine is a part of a much bigger puzzle, the much bigger puzzle of the health care in our community, the health care in our country. And so all these things are huge, and they're all create access, but they also can create some access to worsen poverty if you don't have affordable access or health insurance. And so all of these wonderful tools are available, but when you don't have health insurance, quite honestly, you do everything you can to avoid this, because the quickest way back into poverty is to one afternoon in the emergency room. Next slide, Brian. And so this is a picture of our founder, so Dr. Jack McConnell. Jack's got a great story, and I think that we need to hear it because we kind of came from a similar background. He was the youngest of 7 of a Presbyterian minister, I do believe, and when they sat down for dinner every night, his daddy would say, "What did you do to help somebody else out today?" And he had to answer that question his entire life. And so Dr. McConnell decided to do healthcare and was excited coming out of the foothills in Tennessee and went to medical school, went to residency, and in the last month or 2 of his residency, he got ill. And he came down with TB. In the 50s, when you come down with TB, you're completely pulled out of healthcare. So he's isolated himself. He had to go 18 months, lost part of his lung, darn near died himself. And then when he emerged on the other side of that, he's like, what am I going to do now? He was trained as a pediatrician. He was like, what am I supposed to do? So he spent his own time in prayer and decided, you know what? He still wasn't completely sure that he was cured of TB, and he went in the research route. And the research route at that time, as a pediatrician, there's this pharmaceutical company that says, we'd like to make a medicine that is safe for children, that can help them with fevers and pain. And so McNeil Labs brought him on to help him do research and developed what you and I both now know as Tylenol. And McNeil Lab was taken over by Johnson & Johnson, and Johnson & Johnson continued to forward movement of advances in healthcare. He commercialized MRI. He ultimately wound up working on the Human Genome Project. So Dr. McConnell had a wonderful, wonderful career, but eventually came back here to Hilton Head, and just like when he was a kid walking up and down the road, and he was hitchhiking because the youngest of 7 was not the kid that got the car. And he'd pick up hitchhikers. And as he'd pick up hitchhikers, he'd ask them 2 questions. He'd say, where do you get your health care? And usually the answer is, yeah, I'm healthy, I don't need health care. And the other question goes, and where do you work? Because they all worked, and they worked hard. But he kept coming against this stumbling block of nobody had access to health care. But he knew the island, he was social on the island, he was a neat person to get to know and very socially connected, and he realized there's a lot of talent on this island that might be able to help address, from the doctors and the nurses and lay people. I think the solution to providing health care may be close by. The problem is definitely close by. In the resorts, in the restaurants, in the golf courses, in the landscaping, in the housekeeping, these folks all work incredibly hard. but they don't necessarily and most likely don't have health insurance and don't have access to health care. So he started Volunteers in Medicine 30 years ago. So we are now coming up past 30 years. He loved this picture because this was our first patient. He hates this picture because doctors pick on doctors. And the doctors would say, Jack, you know, those things do a whole lot better if you put them in your ear. But this was our first patient, and they were brought in because this child had 0 immunizations. And I know that story because the marketing director for Palmetto Electric brought us a check this week to say thank you, and she was the one that went and got this child's mama and this child and brought her to the clinic for the very first day. But those stories are still here. Next slide, Brian. So when we go to the Volunteers in Medicine, the mission and vision has stayed the same. Pretty simple. Understand and serve the health and wellness needs of our neighbors. Now, the vision statement has got a word in there that we hear a lot in rooms like this, but it is not a word that I've seen in a lot of corporate vision statements. And so that is to have eyes to see those rendered invisible and excluded, to open our arms and our hearts, to reach out and include them, and then healing hands to touch their lives with love, and in the process, heal ourselves. And so Volunteers in Medicine, somebody was asking me, is like, is this, what about Volunteers in Medicine? Is this like where it all started? And it's like, yeah, it started right here 30 years ago, but has subsequently been replicated across the entire country about 120 times. And tomorrow, pick a town, any town, if there's a free and charitable clinic that starts there tomorrow, it is starting under the model that was created right here in Hilton Head. And so we should be very proud of that. But so when people say the model, I'm going to talk more about the model because I've been here coming up on 4 years. And I think I'm just now starting to understand the model. And I'm not the sharpest tack in the box, but I tell you what, the 35 years I spent in healthcare, running hospitals, starting private practices has really changed my mind, a way to address healthcare. And tonight I'm going to talk about the Volunteers in Medicine model and why we think it's applicable. Next slide, Brian. So here's some of the accolades. You know, a lot of patients every year, a lot of volunteer hours. This is a volunteer clinic. And I would tell you that I once said, this clinic is 51% awesome for the patients. And it's 49% awesome for the volunteers. And Mary Ellen McConnell, who's Jack's wife, maybe this tall, maybe 100 pounds wet, right? She pulled me aside, she goes, John, you got a minute, I need to talk to you. And usually that's not the things I like to hear. John, you got a minute, I need to talk to you. She goes, your numbers are wrong. And I was like, what did I say? And she goes, it's not 51-49. It's 50-50, and it has to be that way. This is equally about the volunteers. And so when I talk about the Volunteers in Medicine model, that this is so important. And when people call me and just assume that because I'm at the very first Volunteers in Medicine in the country that I'm going to have answers to any problem they've got, every single time when they call me and they present their problem and their solution is the same solution I would have used working in U.S. healthcare. But that doesn't totally prioritize the doctors and the nurses and the people that are engaged in all the care. But Volunteers in Medicine is keeping 50-50. And yes, it is awesome for the patients, but it's also awesome for the doctors and the nurses and lay volunteers because the vision to see those invisible and excluded, he wasn't just talking about our patients. He was also talking about the solution that was sitting right here on this island that nobody could figure out, how do we get these people up to help? And there's two things I say he finagled a little bit. He finagled a special volunteer license that if I practice anywhere in the United States, I can show up and within a month, I can be practicing under a special volunteer license right here in the clinic. And that is huge. And then liability, right? How do we protect? We've never been sued, But I tell you what, that would just ruin, the fun for any of our volunteers if they put something at risk doing something for free. And so 57,000 prescriptions. Where you at, Mary Kay? I saw one of our pharmacists here. Yeah. So she's probably filled several thousand of them. And the pharmacy team. We're dental, mental health, wellness, weight loss, breast cancer, lung doctors, hypertension. And this is the collective of talent that we've accumulated over the last 30 years. And we are very proud of this, but this is the illness side of volunteers in medicine. And we're good at addressing illness, but we're also incredibly passionate about promoting wellness and figuring out wellness. And we jokingly say, some of the work we do gets us into heaven, and some of the work we do keeps us out of hell, right? And so the work that gets us into heaven is when we can prevent disease and people never have to deal with it. Next slide, Brian. So where are we at? We're on the north side of the island. If you know where Ace Hardware is, the movie theater's up on the north side. That's where Volunteers in Medicine are. If you've never been there, that's where you kind of swing on by. Swing on by there any day, Monday through Friday. And because right now, most of the cars are parked up and down Northridge or Palmetto Parkway because we have a parking problem. You must live or work on Hilton Head or Defusky or in the region, not have health insurance. And we're going to talk just a bit about this federal poverty level. I know you guys touched on it last week with Dale and Sandy, but I tell you what, this is pretty important as we talk about poverty, to where when you ask people, how did it even get defined, it's still a little bit of a stretch. But the 300% federal poverty level says that, hey, if I'm living alone and I make $45,000, just me, I can come to the clinic and get help. Or if I'm married with 4 children, I can make up to $125,000. And that sounds like a lot of money. Does anybody here have 4 children? Right, so with that, Joe, feeding them, clothing them, educating them, sending them off to school, and if they're girls, they tend to want to get married, that gets expensive, and the boys, they usually got to be bailed out once or twice, So that's the federal poverty level. So those are the numbers right now in 2024 of really what it takes to be a patient there. And we see new patient registrations every morning and in the afternoons. And we don't accept government funding. There is government funding out there. We could turn this free and charitable clinic into a Medicaid clinic and call it a federal qualified health center and draw federal government dollars. We haven't had to. We have been very dependent on our community, and in turn, our community has been very dependent on us, and it works. The government has an incredible skill of taking the fun right out of medicine. And I'm not so sure I'd be able to keep, 500 volunteers if we really had to do all the regulations that went along with Medicaid. Next slide, Brian. You can click 1, 2, 3 on here. This is what you guys heard last week. So I borrowed some of Sandy and Dale's slide. The definition of poverty, is basically, honestly, there's probably a bunch of old white guys sitting around going, how do we define this if we're going to give a benefit, right? And that benefit was Medicaid or soon to be Medicare. And when you look at it, then they defined it, we'll say, what does it take to get through a month? If you're eating, what does it take to feed you and or your family? And they said 3 meals a day for 30 days, and they ran those numbers. And let's say that was $100. And then said, well, that shouldn't take up more than 30% of your income. Otherwise, you don't have enough money. And so they just took what food costs for a month, multiplied it by 3, and they defined that as the federal poverty level. Since then, some things have changed. All right? So, the cost of health care, for one, has definitely changed. Education has changed. Transportation has changed. There's so much has changed. And so the words federal poverty level really don't mean a whole lot anymore, which is why I've got a 300% tied on top of that to be a qualification at VIM. And nobody at VIM really cares about 300%. But the pharmaceutical companies that give us free medicine, about $6 million with the free medicine, they have said, will you please not distribute these medicines to anybody who's above the 300%? And that's why that number's there. But for us, for the physicians to care for people, to bring in, let's see what's going on, I mean, it makes it easy when we've got this cutoff. But the cutoff right now, and if the pharmaceutical companies come next year with a conscience, that was a joke. But they're going to say, please don't give this, maybe 350, maybe 400. And then we'll all argue, let's raise it up, because we're nowhere near meeting the needs. The average patient at Volunteers in Medicine is about 110% of the federal poverty level. So in reality, our patients really are right there at the federal poverty level. And so that's how we define poverty, but so much has changed. And I was having a discussion out here, well, we should change that. Honestly, I mean, we're already at 300%. So all we're going to do is change it to 400% or 500%. So I'm not sure that redefining it is going to help us. I always make a comment that you can't fatten a cow by weighing it. And anytime you get government regulations to really define something, they just don't always come out the back end and have benefited anything. So I'm not uncomfortable with this 300% federal poverty level, but right now that's where our threshold is. Next slide, Brian. And so there you go. So we just take that number with 3 persons in the family and multiply it by 3, and then they can come see us at Volunteers in Medicine. Next slide. And so the return on investment is an important one. So you, the community, you've invested in us for 30 years. And some of the churches represented here have invested in us every step of the way. And so we talk about what can we do to not only recruit, but also retain our workforce and the people that really make this island beautiful, that make this island a fun place for us to visit 25 years ago before we could come down here and live, and for our friends to come, and it just makes it a wonderful place. The second number there is pretty important because people talk about uncompensated health care. In reality, there is no such thing as uncompensated health care. Having run a hospital, I would tell you that anybody out here had a small business in their life? All right, so you guys paid for the uncompensated health care because your premium, if I work over here and I just do Obamacare, I'm going to pay this much. But if I work for you and you're giving me health care, it's going to cost about 1.35 or almost 1.4 times what it would cost yesterday before I worked for you. So you are paying the premium that's covering this uncompensated health care. But the reason we want to do our very best to make sure that if somebody doesn't need to go to the emergency room, they don't go to the emergency room, is because that does cost money. That money does get spent. It's just hidden who actually pays for it. But anybody who's ran a business, and a small business in particular, you know exactly who's paid for it. You've paid for it. And so we're trying to decrease that because that's important for our community. And certainly when we talk about our quality, these numbers I'm going to give you are not comparing them to free and charitable clinics. These numbers I'm going to give you are comparing them to the Cleveland Clinic and to the Mayo Clinic and to Kaiser Permanente. Diabetes control. We've got 70% of our patients are controlled. That's better than Kaiser Permanente. Our hypertension, if your blood pressure, was 140/90, 85% of our patients are below 140/90. That is great. That's better than Mayo Clinic. Now, I did find this tiny little group out of Ohio, up around Dayton and Cleveland area. Now, they're getting 94% control. And I just called them up. I'm like, how are you doing this? You guys are just blowing everybody out of the water. And they said, well, we've been looking at this for about 25 years. And we've just taken the guidelines, we've built in tools into this thing we call an electronic health record. And it just gives us an immediate feedback. Some people would say prod and says, hey, your patient's not where they want to be. Or maybe you consider this medicine, or maybe you could think about changing this medicine. And it's feedback built into electronic health record to give you accordance with the guidelines. I am a general surgeon. I've got Dr. Roth right here. He is a world-renowned lipidologist. He will take the time to read 18 pages of cholesterol guidelines. I can't get past page 3 as a surgeon unless there's pictures the rest of the way, folks. So I need some help to say, what should I be doing to control this person's cholesterol? But we have a lot of people like me. I've got radiologists who are trying to care for patients in primary care. I've got anesthesiologists who want to come and help and deliver primary care. So, and about once a year, I'll have a doctor come to me and say, you know what, John, I just don't know if I'm doing the right thing. And I'm just not getting enough feedback. I think it's time for me to step away from medicine. And sometimes we do need to step away from medicine. But boy, I tell you what, if we're doing good, we don't want anybody to step away from medicine. And so that's what these tools we're building around us so that we can get this feedback to say, you know what, we're doing good. And I'll probably never be as good as Dr. Roth, but if I follow these guidelines, I'm going to be a close second. And I'm happy with that. But that's coming at you from a general surgeon. And so we come across mammography. Almost 85% of our patients who needed a mammogram get a mammogram. Fit test is our colonoscopy screen. That's where people mail in a little piece of poop and look for blood. And if there's blood there, then I get a free colonoscopy from Buford Memorial. Now, does that sound like the gift of the week? A free colonoscopy from Buford Memorial, but that is golden, folks, because that is the true gold standard to really let's make sure everything's okay in that colon. And so I talk about, people come to me all the time because the rest of America and U.S. healthcare is struggling with burnout and resiliency, and they are just frazzled. And I always tell them, come over to the clinic, because we don't have burnout and resiliency. And the beautiful thing is everything we do. So, Dr. Eli, I'm going to pick on you again. How many bills have you sent out in the last couple of years since you've been at VIM? It's something fun about healthcare when you can do it for free. And when he needs a medicine, for the most part, our pharmacy has got us the medicines that the patients need. And we're training the future doctors. We're training the future dentists, the nurse practitioners, the PA, the counselors. So this wealth of knowledge that we've accumulated on this island in a very time-managed area, nobody's like, we got to get this done in 5 minutes for the next patient. That doesn't happen at VIM. You know, we sit there and chit-chat and with the students, and then until the next patient comes in. And I have been there for 4 years, and no patient has ever yelled at me for being late. And I've been late a few times. I don't ever have anybody, because they say, you guys are worth the wait. Next slide, Brian. So beyond the illness side, which I would say we're doing pretty good, and we're very proud of that, but call me back next year, because I'm going to tell you that we have not only beaten Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic, now we're up there with PriMed out of Ohio, because those guys, now I want to beat them, right? But they're the ones that wrote this software that really is going to allow us to deliver even better healthcare. So these are some of the accolades. The biggest one is like the top one and the bottom one. And the 30 years when I got here, the best advice I got was, John, just don't screw this up. Just trust that the model works, and the model works wonderfully. I'm a little embarrassed to say it took me probably 3 years to totally understand the model, but once I understand the model, it's beautiful. And when I get on the phone, and it's funny because now I've got to teach it to somebody over the phone to say, stop looking at this problem through the lens of U.S. healthcare. You need to look at this problem through the lens of your clinic or volunteers in medicine. And the very bottom one probably just speaks for itself. If a free clinic starts tomorrow, it's under y'all's model. Next slide, Brian. So I'd read this a long time ago, and I actually truly believe it, that the ingredients for a happy life are hope, purpose, and love. And this isn't just for our patients. This is also for our volunteers. And so when people are sick, and when they're struggling with poverty, hope is one of the easiest things to lose. And I'll even talk to our students, and I'll say, what are you hopeful for? And sometimes they're like, I'm just hoping to get through school, or I'm just trying to do this. But I was like, show it to me on your calendar. Pull it out. Who are you going to go visit? What concert are you going to see? What date do you have? I mean, there's something you want to hope for. And what we find with our patients is that when they're sick, it's pretty easy to lose hope. The second of which is these folks work. They work because they have to work, but they also find purpose in work because they are providing for their families. If you've got a chance to come to last 2 weekends ago, Latinos Unidos, the Latino community is an amazing focus on the family. So when you're driven to do good work and to perform well, to take care of your family, that provides purpose. But just like you heard in the vision statement, when you're at the Volunteers in Medicine, between volunteers and donors and patients and everybody, guest is that last word, not love. And that's not one that came easily with me into healthcare, other than what I innately brought myself. But I never had an organization drive love into the work that we do. Now, Pastor, you guys do it all the time, right? You got the ultimate love given to us. And I will give you credit. I'm only going to help them out for this short period of time on this earth, and you've got them from then on out. But love, let's don't underestimate just how powerful that is. And so when you come by, and I want you to come visit, I want you to just feel, I hope you can feel it now, that there's love. And that, I think, is our key secret ingredient. Brian, next up. And so here's our amazing pharmacy team. That's maybe 1/10 of what they have. But you can also see as a physician, when I walk in there trying to figure out which one to choose for blood pressure, I'm like, oh my gosh, you know? So this is where some of this machine learning helps me give guidance to how best to manage diabetes and how best to manage hypertension. Next slide up. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about wellness, because illness is that's what all medicine's known for, but that's probably not the most important thing as we focus on. Let's focus on wellness. And for us, wellness can actually go a million different directions. It can go into relaxation, it can go into sleep, it can go into mind-body, it can go into stretch, it can go into power muscles, it can go into food. It can go to food that you want to eat, and maybe food that you don't want to eat. And it's almost too many different directions. And so our wellness team has been very focused. Really, what are we eating? And what are we doing? So activity and doing. And the one thing that's amazing, you take a housekeeper or a golf course worker who puts in 20,000 steps in a day, and you change their diet this much, you can get some amazing results. And so we figured out we don't need to yell at people, you need to move more. No, they're moving. We need to move more. So I go home and then my watch is yelling at me, you need to move more. But for the most of the time, our patients, they're doing pretty good. And activity and stretch and the things that we focus on wellness, but it's very much focused on what are we eating and how smart can we get everybody into what we're eating. Every culture's got a few of the things that are going to come up and bite them in those comfort foods. So it could be bread and potato over here for the Northern Europeans. It could be rice and plantains for our Jamaicans. It could be rice and tortilla for our Latinos. But every culture's got something that's our comfort foods. But some of those comfort foods really provide barriers to people's health when we're trying to treat diabetes and when we're trying to treat obesity. Sometimes it's a little bit different than when we're trying to prevent obesity or trying to prevent diabetes. Two entirely different realms. Next slide. So this is one of our neat ideas. We had this room that was sitting around because it was a Zumba room. And since COVID, nobody had done Zumba indoors, period. And it was like, what's this room sitting here empty for? And it was kind of annoying me personally. So I'm like, let's do something with this room. And I said, well, what can we do? And we said, we thought about these vertical hydroponic gardens with them. If I could do it all over again, I probably wouldn't have put it right next to dental and development to where when one of these things floods, the dentists come over and like, hey, there's water coming in from next door. But these things are vertical hydroponics. Next slide, Brian. And so basically what they are, they're like 6-foot chia pets that you open up, and they'll go from a plant this big to a full head of lettuce in 28 days because it's got about 18 hours of sunlight. But this little tiny room is spinning off about 30,000 heads of lettuce a year. Now, that is just neat. So Elizabeth said, I'm not a farmer. This is an accident. I'm a chemist. I know nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, so I know the elements that make these plants grow, but I'm not a farmer. I have killed more lettuce than anybody in South Carolina. I guarantee it. But these little chia pets are just fun. Now, we've all been told you need to eat more fruits and vegetables, right? But has anybody then handed you 3 bags full of romaine lettuce and say, this was harvested this morning? Because when you and I buy it at the store, it stays in your fridge for how long? A couple days, right? Until it starts to wilt and molt. But if you get it straight out of here, you've almost got 2.5 weeks before you see anything, because our food has been on the road for 2.5 weeks before we even got it. Next slide up. So these were a couple of our students here, and this is about 1/4 of the crop. No, we're not in cannabis. This is cilantro. So why would I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times 4? Why would I need 40 bags of cilantro? Next slide, Brian. Latinos Unidos. They set up a day on Sunday, our Latin patients, to say thank you to us. And it's got to be on a Sunday because that's the only day they have off work. And every one of these tents is a different nationality, a different country, a different food, a different drink. And you can walk around with your tickets and say, I'd like a gordita, I'd like a ripa, I'd like a taco, I'd like a juice, a fresca. This year we had a tent that could have a beer. And so I was a little nervous, but it did wonderful. A cerveza. That's why you needed 40 bags of cilantro, because we wanted to provide for the people that were providing for us. And they charged a couple of dollars for tickets to come on in. But last Wednesday night, they came over to the clinic just to say thank you and to present us with a check. And they presented us a check, Kim, for $107,000. And it was the biggest hug all day long, all I heard. It was in Spanish. I didn't understand most of the day, but for what I did keep hearing was, voluntarios medicine. And it was just like, thank you. And it was the biggest hug we'll ever have, and until next year. And then we'll do it again. Next slide. And so this was a little area here. You can go to the next slide, Brian. This had what my daddy would say, son, that has crossed the line from rustic to dilapidated, And so we said, well, let's clean it all up. And this was our Rotary, and Hilton Head Community Church came up and helped us rip everything up and planted this thing down. Next slide, Brian. And so then it starts to grow. Every one of these planters, we've got a rotating crop. Our patients will come by and I'm like, that looks like broccoli. I'm like, yeah, that's how broccoli grows. That's pretty cool, isn't it? And take a pair of scissors and cut it off and hand it to them. And in the spring, we'll have probably this year we had 3,000 red solo cups, and they all had the tomato plants and cucumber plants and bell pepper plants and jalapeno plants. So last year they wiped me out of jalapeno plants, and this year I was not going to be beat. And we gave them thousands and thousands of jalapeno plants that they took home. And then they planted in their plots or their backyards. And then about 3 months later, little excess food starts coming back to them from their plants that grew extra. So every one of this is essentially an edible entrance to the wellness center. But it's so important as we're focusing our patients on food and healthy options. Next slide, Brian. And then we looked at, and you've seen this wonderful rolling shrubs, right? That a patient was actually trimming for us on a weekly basis, and they're looking beautiful. We kind of looked at it and those things really don't do anything. Maybe we should do something this. So we called some more patients and said, let's rip everything up. And so next slide, Brian. We ripped them all up. We planted these little trees. That's an avocado, that's a grapefruit. Next slide, Brian. That's the whole look of it now. That used to be that rolling shrubs. And right there you've got grapefruit, avocado, grapefruit, Valencia orange. If you can see that big green one in the middle is a banana tree. Now, I had a lot of people say, John, you ain't growing avocado, mango and banana on this island. It just doesn't grow. And I was like, well, what if? And they're like, you ain't going to grow it. And I said, but, you ain't going to grow it. But up here, I don't like it when people say I can't do stuff. Now, this concrete, when you walk out into concrete, what do you feel? It's warm. So this little tongue of dirt is about 7 degrees warmer than the rest of Hilton Head. And so is South Florida. So next slide, Brian. Isn't that? And now I've got everybody on the island driving by and going like, you can't grow banana on this island. And you can't grow avocado. We've got avocado and banana. I haven't seen any mango, so they may have been right on the mango. But I tell you what, I think I just got to reposition that tree is what I need to do. We're not trying to be wonderful gardeners. We're trying to then take this and over to our patients and just show, hey, this is what fresh fruit and fresh produce looks like. And then maybe let's not eat this, or this. Next slide. So we have a parking problem. If you come there on Tuesdays and Thursdays, for sure, it is up and down, North Ridge and Palmetto Parkway. And Ray from Ray's Cafe will call me pretty much within 10 minutes when our patients start parking in his parking lot and say, hey, they're filling up my parking lot. So the town has actually given us this acre of land over here. And that acre of land just started last week to be cleared out for about 65 parking spots. So nothing super exciting about a round parking lot. But when you say, and I'm going to put 200 fruit trees around it, and I'm going to have raised planters on a little walking path around it, now that gets kind of exciting. So sure, I had all the doctors and nurses coming to Vim within a week of moving to the island. But now I've got master gardeners coming, and their engineering husbands who kind of like, water, hydraulics and making water. And they love it when I give them a leak. I say, can you guys fix that? And they geek out on that just like doctors geek out on disease. And they're like, we'll figure out this, John. You're okay. And so, but keep swinging by as we convert this. Initially, you're going to be mad at me because I am cutting down a few pine trees, but then I'm going to be planting about 200 fruit trees. And hopefully, I may not ever get the chance to eat off of those fruit trees, but they'll be there for our community to enjoy and to learn about healthy eating. Next slide. And so you get to hear about Circles coming up. And when we talk about the Circles program, it's a step-by-step empowerment of people as we're going through. And you saw this last week. The last thing I want to close on, next slide, Brian, is that as we're helping people and we're doing this, we're doing more and more. They're getting jobs, they're getting better pay, they're getting more benefits. But unfortunately, if they get one more dollar pay, they're dropping off the cliff. And this cliff effect is just, it's structured to just, it doesn't make sense. Let them work harder to make more money, but don't completely get them to drop off that cliff. So if I want some social awareness, I really would say, one, food is so very important in health. If you don't have enough food, poverty is going to get you. And one weekend in the emergency room is going to take away all your life savings. And so everything we can do to continue to support our working poor. But these folks are wonderful, wonderful people. And when you look at stuff like Latinos Unidos, their capacity for love and their focus on the family and their focus on faith is just phenomenal. And so let's do everything we can to support all of our communities as we go through this. But let's be very cognizant that the structure, the system we've built is structured to fail when you get one more dollar and you lose all these benefits and you are right back off the cliff. Next slide, Bart. So this is just a balance, right, for our patients. When you talk about poverty in healthcare, education makes a difference. But the top 1% in dollars and the bottom 1%, how many years of lifespan do you think are between those two numbers? Almost 15 years lifespan between the people at the top of the poverty number and the people at the bottom. We talk about education. You talk about transportation. You talk about family support. You talk about community support. You talk about some of your zip codes where you live. And when you have hospitals in Chicago, there are some zip codes you just don't want to live in because it can be a problem. Next slide. Who can tell me where this is? This is in Amritsar, Indian, and it's the Golden Temple. It's the Jerusalem of the Sikh religion. And I would think of Sikhism to be old, right? It seems ancient. You know, you've got your turban, you've got your little knife, you've got, but it's 1800s. It's young. It's a combination of Islam and Christianity. But the reason I put it up here is to remind me that while I'm so proud of Volunteers in Medicine, this organization serves 250,000 meals a day with 11 people on staff. And so everything they do, I think, is given to the Holy Spirit, which I don't think they believe in, but that's what I'm calling it, and volunteers, and they just make it work. And so what we see in our not-for-profit community, what we see at Volunteers in Medicine, the word stands for it. It's the volunteers. And this organization that can serve 250,000 meals a day, and I'm talking supply chain, I'm talking cooking, I'm talking cleaning, I'm talking getting, their patrons in and out. It's just amazing. Next slide. So how can you help when you're talking about VIM? So hopefully you guys carry the message out. If you're talking to donors, awesome. Get them over to Kim as soon as you can. Talk about patients. When you're at a restaurant, ask your server. Have the confidence that Dr. McCollum did and say, hey, where do you get your health care? And if they say, I don't need any health care, it's okay to use our name in vain and say, you've got some doctors and nurses that really do want to care for you free of charge over at Volunteers in Medicine. And I'm having this talk all the time. And I'm still, every time I have that conversation, about every second person has not heard about Volunteers in Medicine. Some of them have heard about VIM. Some of them have heard about that free clinic up by the Ace Hardware. But, okay, I got a branding problem. But we need to get the message out to our patients. The volunteers, I don't think if you're a doctor or nurse, I think you get on this island, within a week, someone's bugging you to volunteer at VIM. But don't forget those master gardeners and their engineering husbands, because I've got some work to do with that edible parking lot. And anybody who wants to volunteer, there is no skill set that we can't put into good practice. And then come into churches, right? One of the biggest things that we've done is gone into our African American churches and just talk about Volunteers in Medicine. And when we talked to that community, we were really thought to be kind of a Band-Aid clinic. But when we talk about dental, we got 10 offertories. We talk about mental health. We talk about 57,000 prescriptions. They're like, wow. We've got X-ray on the building. We've got ultrasound in the building. We have the capacity to get you a CAT scan or an MRI if so needed. They're like, wow, that's not a Band-Aid clinic. But that still is the perception of many folks about Volunteers in Medicine. And the financial support, labs cost money, pharmacy costs money, a parking lot. I hope to get, $200,000 of bananas out of it, but it's going to be a few years. And if anybody has any questions, comments, feel free to bug me at jnewman@vimclinic.org. But now it's time to open it up for questions to what do you guys have really about healthcare, poverty, Volunteers in Medicine, anything in particular you want to ask? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so for the folks streaming, the question was, hey, what about unexpired medicines? I would say maybe 10 years ago we would take open medicines, but really none since then. COVID shut all that down. But right now, yes, I can accept unopened, unexpired medicines. And so that's changed. COVID shut it down for a couple of years, and then it was like, well, this is kind of silly. This doesn't make any sense. But we get not only that, but durable medical equipment. I get wheelchairs and walkers and crutches and and canes. So yeah, and if we can't find it, some of the things we don't keep on the clinic, we don't keep opioids, we don't keep controlled substances, but then we'll get rid of that for you. So just bring it by during the day. The number one innovation in our clinic last year, above artificial intelligence and electronic health record, above, all of our new lipid medicines, sorry, Dr. Roth, the number one innovation was our walk-up window for our pharmacy. That's the one that everybody said, that has been a game changer. Next question. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, absolutely. With we've got oral surgeons, so if we've got a tooth that needs to be pulled, we can pull the tooth. If we've got a cavity, we can fill a cavity. But if we've got dentures, one of the best stories is the 72-year-old gentleman whose birthday was next week, right? And we got him his 2 front teeth dentured and put in for him so he could eat his cake with his front teeth. It's really for Hilton Head and the community, right? So the restriction on the parochialism of Hilton Head was important 30 years ago because St. John's had a free clinic and there was another free clinic over here, and they're like, let's don't cross over. But now, between Good Neighbor and Beaufort, we're working together. Between Bluffton, Jasper, Vim, we're working together. We're going to just do the right thing for the patients. And so if we happen to be, we're blessed. We've got 27 dentists on staff. So it's like if we can accommodate them. And most Medicare doesn't have a dental plan. Medicaid doesn't really have a dental plan. So our dental department, you'll see newborns going in there and 100-year-olds. 300% federal poverty level still sticks, though. So yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, so I'm a little nervous about this because it's not quite ready for prime time, but, Sandy at Deep Well, I saw her a little earlier, there. And so her and I were like, because she brings us food, right, that we distribute to our patients, because there's no Sandy patients and there's no John, or Sandy's patrons or clients and John's patients, they're the same people, right? So Sandy brings us food that we distribute to the patients, but when we grow extra produce, we can take it over to Deep Well because they have refrigerators and they have the ability to keep that. And we'll take it to Sandalwood on Tuesday, and we'll give it to Second Helpings, who will put it on the truck and distribute it all the way out to Jasper County. But we're coming up short. And so in so doing, we said, well, we need some space and we need some more farms. But Surge has said, we've got some space, so you're welcome to use it. And so we'll take care of the electricity, the water, do what you need to do and grow, and we'll see where it goes. And so that's where we're at now. We're just about to the point of saying, let's get this thing out there. We got to find some patrons to help us buy the farms. But then whatever we grow comes back to Sandy, Deep Well, and Vim, Second Helpings. And so our hope is that it just grows, right? To maybe it'll grow phenomenally, and we'll have so many more master gardeners volunteering to grow food than we've ever had doctors and nurses, that becomes one of the coolest things that Hilton Head has ever been known for, is how to grow food and share with our community. So more to learn about that in the future. So everybody else, shh. Yes, sir. It's a part of the clinic, the front part of the clinic. It is now with the new parking lot going to be the entrance of this organization. And so patients usually come weekly. And for the last quarter, almost 500 patients came in and out of there. And 490, I think, had sit-down conversations about what goal do you have this week? Now, wellness, when they sit down with the coaches and the counselors, and most of our counselors are nutritionists, registered dietitians, physical therapists, a lot of them are people who didn't really want to be over in the illness side of the house, and these people, but they're people that are so interested and fascinated with food and what it can do to help us. But then with some self-education to realize that 5 servings of fruits and vegetables is a better treatment for depression than Prozac. That's borne out in the literature. So these patients come weekly. And yes, they get food. And yes, they sit down and talk about what's your goal this week. And so the other thing the wellness team is helping us out a lot is asking them, are you taking your medicines? Because even though we give people free medicines, that doesn't mean they're all going to take it. And so if they do in the discussion realize that they're not consistently taking their medicines, they communicate that to the medical side, and we just continue to have this conversation. So swing on by. When you walk in there, it'll be all walks of life, and they'll come up and greet you, and you'll see a couple fridges. And the day of harvest, it'll be completely full. 2 days later, it'll be completely empty. And Thursday, it'll be completely full. But those are the conversations that are happening in wellness. And I think those are perhaps some of the most important conversations that are happening in Volunteers in Medicine. Great question. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Nope. And I'm not sure the last 30 years that there may have been a surcharge for the medicines that we gave you, but the model is free. All right. And so we do have patients that donate. I've got one patient that rides his bike in and brings $1 or $2 every week, even if he doesn't have an appointment, because this is his clinic. And he'll show up and say, here's my donation. Now, at the end of the year, after 20+ thousand visits, the patients bring us about $150,000. So, I mean, it's amazing, and they're proud to support. But sometimes it's $1, and sometimes it's $50. But yeah, so and the model is the free clinic model. There are charitable tiered dollars. If you make this much, you pay this much clinics in the country. That is not the VIM model. The VIM model is the free clinic. Good question. Yes, ma'am. And she takes her Tuesday afternoons to teach her students. So the students sit down with a pharmacist as they're talking the medicines that they're learning about to the next level. I mean, I never got to just sit down and spend my afternoon with the pharmacist to say, take me a little more about maybe how some of these supplements interact with this medicine, or maybe how this medicine interacts with this medicine. So, I mean, that's the kind of talent we have, and we'll take it all. Yes, ma'am. So in our summers, great question. So the summertime, we usually have 3 to 4 Notre Dame students who are bilingual. So the purpose of them coming in is most of them are interested in medicine. So they get to hang out, and because they're interpreting. So if I'm interpreting in Dr. Roth's room, I'm going to get to watch Dr. Roth. Maybe Dr. Ruth is like, a little Freudian slip there, Eli. So, I get to watch Dr. Ruth take care of patients, and I get to translate. And I get to interpret, and I get to learn the other language of medicine, right? So they're all 3 months, and just a wonderful, wonderful collection. And our Notre Dame students, probably 50% of them have made it into med school. We've been invited to many of their graduations from med school. But every day we'll have 3 or 4 nurse practitioner PA students. We'll have interns from this high school and college. And so during the summer this year, we had 42 high school kids. Now, what do? What does a high school kid do in a clinic? Well, I've got a lot of 80-year-old doctors that are trying to get this computer to turn on. And those 15 and 16-year-old high school kids can get that computer to turn on and make it work. And they are tech with a heart. And so they're the ones that were taking videos and posted up to social media and giving a virtual tour of Volunteers in Medicine. So I didn't pay for that to get generated. It came out of our students. And well, VIM was started for our Gullah population. And you go back 30 years, the clinic started around supporting the Gullah population. Now our workforce has changed, but I would say, and I don't mind saying that I think it's sometimes then we've taken that relationship for granted. And so part of my last 3 or 4 years, we're spending time with the Gullah population, because when people get to 65 and they get Medicare, on one hand, that's great. You now have Medicare. But for then me to say, we've been carrying you for 20 years and now you've got to leave, that's not good, right? So we've really tried to figure out a transition. And some patients can transition marvelously. And it's great for them to have that secure. And some people can't afford Medicare. And so you've got A, you've got B, and you've got D. And so, but if you've got A and B, our doctors don't care if you've got Medicare. If you can't afford your medicines, we still want to take care of you. So we balance a lot of that, but it's back to the balance. And if we can get them to the community's got good health care. But yeah, so I totally agree. I would throw Deep Well and Second Helpings and Children's Center, and we had a few other ones there that, to be honest, I'm standing on their shoulders, because Deep Well's been here for 51 years. So, I mean, they set the direction, right? And so our next talk, I know we got Siobhan talking about Circles program, talking about actually what we're doing to bring these folks up, to get him more and more empowered, but also the reality of this cliff effect. And I just keep saying it's so important for them to understand poverty and health, because one sick weekend, if I go to the emergency room, then everything you worked for is gone. So we all got to do this together. So everybody in this room has got an oar in the water as we just keep paddling and moving the people that we love, that take care of us, to keep this beautiful island that has been caring for us for a long time, and hopefully will continue to care for in the future. And I promise you, Volunteers in Medicine will continue to do its very best with yes, ma'am. Yeah, that cliff effect is we empower people. We get them to go negotiate for better jobs. They're going to school. They're getting more education. They should get paid more money. And as they get paid more money, then they reach this point to where you're at this level. If you take one more dollar raise, then you may lose Medicaid. You may lose your housing subsidies. You may lose your food stamps. And you lose it all at once. And so you go from, man, I'm supported, I'm doing great, to having nothing because you get a $1 pay raise. Does that make sense what this cliff effect is? And so when we talk about, that's something we should be talking to our senators and our representatives to say, that is just going to force people I wouldn't take that pay raise. I can't afford the pay raise, which just sounds absurd. So that's the cliff effect. Well, if anybody has any other questions, feel free to come up. I just want to say thank you very much for being here tonight. Have a good one. All right. And so, Elizabeth, can we let everybody go home?
Okay, did you hear that? Next week, 7 o'clock, Congregation Beth Yam, Second Helpings, Marcus Tanner will be speaking to us. So I hope we will see you there. I'm just going to close in of Congregation Beth Yam, Meeting Street. Mm-hmm. Bring a friend, I hear. Okay. I'll just close us in prayer. Heavenly One, it is night, and it is night after a long day, and we are thankful to be here in the house of the Lord. We are thankful for people that care about those that are hungry. You call us to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and companion the lonely, and that's what we're trying to do. So thank you for them. Thank you for Dr. John talking to us tonight. Send your spirit to stir in us that we may be moved to act. For this is our prayer. May it be so. Amen.
Thank you, Elizabeth.